All right, so I've been hearing, so I'm sure you've been hearing that the trucking industry is about 80,000 drivers short, and the ATA estimates that by 2030, it'll be 160,000 drivers short. So some of you might say, man, this is a great opportunity to come into the trucking industry because they're already short drivers. That means they have a supply-demand issue. And usually when you have supply-demand issues, you need more trucks than you have. Of course, rates go up, prices go up. Driver pay goes up, right? But don't be fooled, because that has been an issue supposedly now for a very long time. And how I see it, if rates were down, that would tell me there probably isn't a driver shortage, right? And rates are down right now. So I don't think that there's a driver shortage necessarily, because you have 400,000 new drivers coming into the industry every year, right? So I know they say it's 80,000 short, but don't be fooled by that. We also have to look at the fact that if you're considering financing a big rig, if you're saying, hey, I'm going to come into the industry to finance a truck, that's a very risky endeavor right now. And the reason why I say that is because you have to take a look out as what's happening in the world, what's happening in the United States right now. And you could very well see, if you're just looking, that rates are rising. The Federal Reserve is raising rates, right? And they're raising rates to try and combat inflation. And you don't know where that's going to stop at, right? So if they're raising rates, that means they're raising the cost to finance a truck, right? It's going to cost you a whole lot more money. You're not going to be able to finance at the 4 or 5% you may have been able to finance. Now, those rates are going to be much higher, right? They're considering a 1 point or 100 basis point, I should say, raise for the next Federal Reserve meeting. That's a whole point, right? So to me, if you look at where rates are right now, you look at how much you would have to finance a truck for, that just doesn't pass the common sense test. I know as a broker, if I was considering bringing on additional assets, let's say I was going to say, okay, I'm going to become an asset-owned brokerage and start owning trucks, this certainly wouldn't be the time that I would do that. When I look at the interest rates and I look at rates, what rates are now, I just don't see how that passes the common sense test, how that passed the financial sense test. So that wouldn't be a move that I would make. I would certainly suggest that if you're looking to come into the trucking industry and you're still thinking about doing it, hey, take a look at it closely. You know, I'm not saying that it's not something that you shouldn't do. I think it's just based on your situation. Certainly, if you're financing, to me, you have to look at that interest rate. You have to look at the cost of owning a truck and then look at what's happening in the trucking industry to help you make that decision. Now, yes, things are not always going to be this way. Rates are not always down because we just came out of a period where rates were super high. So I just don't get it. I don't get this idea that we are somehow 80,000 drivers short. I mean, to me, when you look around, freight brokers, shippers would be in a whole lot worse position if we were that many drivers short. It would be so much harder, I think, to get loads moved. And it's just not that case. That's not the case. You know, I haven't had problems moving loads because I can't find drivers. There are plenty of drivers to use as options to move freight. You know, so I just don't see that being the case. I was in that camp at one time. I read what the ATA was saying and I said, oh, that's it. It's 80,000 short. But that was just based off of information. And what we have to understand is ATA represents big trucking companies. So I guess it may be in their interest to say that we're short drivers, because when you get a lot of drivers in a space, then of course that decreases the value of drivers. It makes it a lot easier to have a cheap driver, right? So I look at what the OOO-IDA says. That's the Owner Operators Independent Drivers Association. They represent about 150,000 independent drivers. And they say that there is not a shortage. They say that the shortage, if there is a shortage, is on the long haul side. But they really don't point to driver shortage as being the issue. The problem, they say, is retention, retaining drivers. And if you look at the numbers, if you look at the ATA's numbers, their statistics, it supports this argument, because those numbers say that big trucking companies have a 90% turnover rate. 90%. Think about that. That's saying that 9 out of 10 drivers that go to these big trucking companies, they stay for less than a year and they're gone, right? So turnover is the problem. Retaining drivers is a problem. And they think that if we did a better job with paying drivers, paying them for their time, because right now drivers don't get paid overtime. They don't get paid for sitting when they're loading and offloading their truck. So there needs to be a better pay scale that comes in for drivers, a different way of paying drivers so that they are compensated for their time. And this may, of course, make the trucking industry a more attractive environment. Maybe drivers would stay longer than that first year. Because if they're having to replace drivers that often, then obviously, to me, it says that there's a retention problem, not necessarily a shortage. Drivers are coming in, they're just not staying because they're not happy with what they're experiencing, right? So when you're looking at buying a truck, I think it's just important to take a look at the landscape and decide whether or not this is the best decision for you at this time. That's what I wanted to share with you today. I certainly hope this information has been helpful. If you're interested in learning more about the freight broker business, as usual, I'll leave a free link in the description. It's my 5-video series, and I titled it How the Load Movement Process Works. And what it does is it gives you a chance to come into the office with me, and you can watch me on video as I move loads. I talk to shippers and carriers so that you'll have a better understanding of how this business works before you come into it. And then if you want to know more about how we go out and get the customers that we work with, the shippers that we do business with on a day in and day out basis, if you don't know how to do that, I have a free video right here showing you exactly how it's done. So until the next time, I wish you the very best in your life and business. See you all the way at the top of the mountain, because the bottom is much too crowded.